Good morning. I am really excited about today. I am joined by Bill and Chris Yanakos. This is the first time I've had father-son. This is the first time I've had Gen 1 and Gen 2 together. So this is a bit of first here on Succession Stories. So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for being with me this morning.
Morning.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So for anyone watching on YouTube, you'll get to see father-son. They definitely look alike. There's definitely some similarities here. And so we'll talk about both of you and your company. So Bill, why don't we start with you? Can you introduce yourself and tell us about the company's history?
Sure, Laurie. Actually founded the company 38 years ago. And so 1982 was the first year of operation. The company has gone through various iterations over the 38 years. I'd like to say that I started this endeavor with a well-formulated business plan and anticipated what would be necessary and how to implement a startup company in the early 80s, and none of that happened. In fact, I had been working at Pittsburgh National Corporation in Human Resources for a number of years, and I wanted to do something on my own. I actually started a wellness center, which was my first endeavor. And that wellness center had a physical therapy unit attached to it. It was essentially a sports medicine type of operation. It was about 30 years ahead of its time. I encountered all the typical difficulties of a startup. And through those early years, it was frankly touch and go as to whether the facility would survive. Where Reli actually came from was out of this wellness center. So I recognized that I could not support this facility with fitness revenue, and I was looking for a means by which I could obtain referrals into this physical therapy center. I had contacted various physicians. I was not getting much participation by the physician community. A number of individuals who I knew had gone into an endeavor back in those days of what's referred to as private rehab. Private rehab focused on the resolution of chronic maligning workers' compensation patients. So I recognized there was somewhat of a market there. I hired a part-time physician and a nurse, and I went out to various insurance companies to see if they would be interested in an evaluation and rehabilitation program for individuals who were post-injury approximately 12 months. So I anticipated in the first year we may get 50 referrals. And in fact, in the first year, we got 750 referrals. So obviously I had found a market, and in doing so, I began to try to shape a program that was a bit more refined than what I had started with. So that
what Bill hasn't told you is that all the while, the corporate wellness center was failing catastrophically.
Okay.
So you have this great genesis of a business while this other business is just absolutely imploding. So, Bill kind of always downplays how much stress that must have been, but a tremendous amount of pressure to make that transition and pivot in this business while really being under so much scrutiny and financial pressure. I mean, it really was a challenge.
Yeah, I think, Laurie, honestly, as with most startups, I had no formal business training. I have a graduate degree in behavior science, and a lot of the genesis to this wellness center came from the fact that I played football in college. I knew something about athletic injuries, and I knew a bit about rehabilitation and fitness, obviously. And so what I found interesting was how effectively I could convince myself that I knew what I was doing. Okay. And I think with most startups and with most entrepreneurs, they are by nature salespeople. And the discipline of selling oneself into an opportunity is compelling. So that took a number of years to unlearn and to realize that the key to making decisions was to consider why it may not work instead of convincing yourself that it would work.
That is a beautiful way to sort of phrase that startup time, where you were really relying on your experience, but at the same time, you're acknowledging you really didn't have the experience in the business side, but you had this experience on what it takes maybe on the rehab and wellness, just from some of the things you experienced. Whole lot of unknowns though. You got started and Chris was explaining that there was a pivot there, which added to the stress of being a startup. So today, bringing us up to a little bit of current day, tell us a little bit about the company Reli today.
Yes, we are in fact in the what's referred to as the occupational medicine space. Occupational medicine really takes two forms. One is direct medical care of individuals who have received work-related injuries, which are covered by workers' compensation insurance. So this would be the occupational medicine clinic, which we have 4 of in the greater Pittsburgh area. The broader network managed care approach to occupational medicine is, as stated, it's a national 42-state network of providers, medical providers, which would include physicians, physical therapy operations, diagnostic centers. And in that network side of the business, we are actually contracting with insurance companies. We receive a book of business from them, which would be the employers that they insure. And then we are managing the supply chain of medicine, so to speak. So we are scheduling initial examinations. We are scheduling and administrating all of the necessary medical care for an individual to return to work.
This was a really interesting pivot for us out of exclusively the clinic locations, right? So when you're talking about owning and operating facilities, you're talking about pretty expensive cost centers, right? Without really any guarantee that the work is going to come in the front door. And so in the early 2000s, when I was getting involved in the business, we worked on this idea of taking network providers, we only may use once or twice a year in places that we certainly could not afford to keep a clinic up and running for those 2 cases, and seeing, can we replicate the level of treatment, right? The quality of treatment that we have in our clinic locations through these network providers. And in fact, we found that we could. The great news about that is to get 50 or 60,000 providers into your network does not now mean that you have to build 50,000 clinics. So we were able to expand geographically very quickly. Again, a slight pivot in the organization, but it allowed us to go from just a few states to over 40 states in less than 5 years.
That's impressive. That's impressive. So this is probably a good segue, Chris. Why don't we talk a little bit about you and when you were growing up, your dad had this company, he was growing it, he was probably working a lot of hours. When did you start to get curious about the business and think, oh, maybe I want to join the company?
my first point of curiosity about the business was it was really fun to go to these wellness centers because they looked like giant playgrounds. However, my dad was under a lot of pressure at the time. And so the business didn't, in all honesty, didn't look all that appealing. And then as I grew up, I got more involved with it, understood the challenges of the business, what was really fun about it. And Bill, why don't you tell about my first job at the business?
Yeah, go back a step. I think Chris was in high school, and at that point, the business had maintained some stability. And Chris was actually looking for a summer job. And I asked him if he wanted to come into the company and work and get familiar with how things function. And he said yes, I think because he didn't know what I was going to have him do. So I gave him literally the lowest of the lowest jobs in the company, in the basement.
Physically lowest. I was actually in the basement.
In the basement, doing filing, trying to collect payments from insurance companies. And my thought was, well, if he will last a summer doing this, then probably he could end up as an integral part of this organization. So
that's a good weed out tactic. If
yes.
you can survive a summer in the basement, you are likely to come back. Was Chris, is that how you remember it too?
That's exactly how I remember it. I will add that in the basement, I did sit under a pipe that periodically mysteriously banged for no reason. So I don't know. There was so much texture to that summer.
A lot of texture. That's a good word. So somehow you got convinced to come back after college.
I did, yes.
Yes. Okay. So
Yep.
what was that like when you joined the company? You're right out of college, and so you kind of had this idea you're going to join. What was the mentorship like when you first started? Did somebody take you under their wing? Was his name Bill, or was it somebody else?
Well, it was there was a lot of sink and there was a lot of swim. Before that, I actually had a job for a brief period of time in the ski industry, which was primarily sales. And so I was coming in with a selling background, which of course in any small to medium-sized business is always on the list of things that you have to be doing, right? You always have to be selling. And so I came in and Bill shifted me into doing sales and, better than collections, but a challenging position, getting familiar with the new industry, trying to understand how we fit in it, what our value proposition was. And I did get a lot of mentoring from Bill. I also got a lot of experience from having really terrible and embarrassing sales calls where I didn't get it right. And so fortunately, Bill was always there to, tell me to shake it off and let's try another one. In fact, the first major account that I sold after coming to the business, Bill and I did together, which was fun. It was kind of a really neat experience of the two of us doing it together.
So the roles that you had, were they in existing departments, or were you carving any new territory with some of the roles that you've had?
So we did have an existing sales department, and that's what I initially went into. As I started to move into a little bit more leadership and we started to make these changes in the structure of the business and how we approach the work that we did, that really became a position outside of those specific departments into an R&D silo that we didn't have before. So that was pretty interesting.
That is interesting. And so, Bill, when you reflect on Chris coming into the company at that time, and he talks about sink or swim, what do you recall? Was he sinking or swimming? Was he floating at the surface and surviving?
Well, he was surviving because, fortunately, I had afforded him a very good education, and he's a smart guy. And as a result, he brought to the table a lot of ideas and a certain creativity that frankly was really needed. There was a key pivot, Laurie, where I recognized that Chris was going to be a major part of the future. We had actually gone on a sales trip, and Chris had, for literally 2.5 hours in the car, tried to convince me that a predictive analytics platform would give us the ability to predict outcomes from a database perspective based on certain categories of injuries. And my initial reaction was, one, that's impossible. Two, it'll never work. Where did you get this idea? And actually, over a period of about a year, I recognized that I had to make a change in how I was looking at my son and how I was looking at the company. I had to, and by the way, Laurie, this was very difficult. I had to let go of being the boss, and I had to let go of the fact that what we had done for some 15 years may not work 5 years from now. And that for me was a personal challenge. Fortunately, my son and I get along very well. We talked about this extensively, and I began to see, hey, there's a new way of doing what we do, and I need to let go of the reins here and start to listen. And Chris, I don't know if that was your perception or not.
I think one of the places where your leadership and disposition was always inspiring is that you would do just that, right? You would be willing to take a step back and realize that, hey, there might be perspectives on this that I'm not seeing, and that it was not always, as you pointed out, about how we had always done it. And Bill said we had a really great communication, the ability to get along even in the midst of pressure. When we outgrew the building, the second building that the company had been in, the last people to get new offices, right, are the two of us. And so we've outgrown this building. My office has been taken. Bill and I are now sitting together in his office, like old detective style, desk to desk, and we had to sit there and work together on the different projects that we had. And I wouldn't recommend that to everyone, but we did a really great job with it. So much so that we moved into a new building. We put a door in between our offices that just is access for the two of us, so that we can leave it open and yell back and forth to each other. So I think one of the things in Bill's transition in that leadership was the fact that he was willing to communicate through all of this, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was a 2-hour argument in the car, of him saying we can't do it and me saying that we can. And so that was really a critical part of our development. Do you see it the same way, Bill?
Yeah, I think for both of us there was a give and take, Laurie. I think what I've seen and with other entrepreneurs that I have become friends or associated with over the years, that there is a critical mistake where they do not hand the baton to the next generation. They become stubborn and fixed. And frankly, there's a certain amount of pride involved. And I think to effectively have a generational type business, there has to be some humility. There is a point where you have to come together with yourself, so to speak, and say, maybe I don't know everything. And I think as a result, Chris was forward thinking. I think he felt comfortable expressing himself. And truthfully, I learned a valuable lesson that, he's a smart guy. And, he's going to think of things that wouldn't even occur to me. Technology was a foreign language to me. And so, yes, I think the give and take was instrumental in us remaining an effective management team.
There's a lot of great insights, what you both just shared. And I love how we went back and forth on it, because it is so interesting to hear both of you talk about it. So one was the opportunity to share a big idea and have that big idea be debated. It wasn't immediately accepted. And so sometimes it takes a little bit of friction to get to the right answer. So that 2.5-hour car ride was a pretty pivotal moment in your history together, because that's also, Chris, when Bill saw you differently, he saw you in a different light, because you were putting together an idea that could take the company to the next level and really into this next generation leadership. And then Bill, for you, seeing Chris in that light and seeing him in that way, you knew he was talented, you knew he was smart, you knew he could sell, but did you see him as that forward-thinking leader? Probably not till that day. And so that sounds like a pretty important car ride in your history together. I love that story. And I was curious also for the management team, were there any other candidates that could have been considered to ascend to the president role besides Chris?
Frankly, there was a sort of COO in place, excuse me, at that time. But very much of the old school, excuse me, the old school of Reli. Excuse me. So I did not see that individual as the next step COO. And there was a transition over a period of probably a couple of years where Chris's insight and his ideas and talent became so obvious that it was just a logical progression to have him move into that position.
So, and if I could put a little bit more texture around the old and new here, we went from an organization that was directly providing care, right? This is very hands-on in these clinic locations. And what I had recommended was we take all of this data that we have collected. We do some statistical analysis, we do some machine learning, and we figure out the things that drive the best outcomes in these claims based exclusively on the diagnosis code and the information that we have collected, so no hands-on information. And then we use that to provide a transparency to our clients, our providers, our stakeholders, our internal team on how do we do the best job for this patient, right? How do we help this patient recover as effectively as possible? The problem with this was, from old to new, was that it's all happening somewhere else, right? It's invisibly happening, and it's not the same as being engaged in an appointment and reviewing a note and going through that. So I think as we moved into the new, that was a big identity shift for the organization.
And you recently went through this identity shift more specifically, I understand, with a name change, because Bill, you mentioned that the old name was Workwell and the new company name is Reli. Has this been in market for within the last year?
Yes, the rebranding actually was completed June of 2020. We had been working on the rebranding of the organization for probably upwards of 18 months. Workwell was the original name, which was really in the industry tied to direct care, and in moving into a network perspective and the predictive analytics and more of a database management approach, we realized we needed a new name.
And we used the opportunity of this pandemic pause to get us there. So, when the pandemic hit, there certainly we experienced the fear and uncertainty that everyone did, and certainly nobody was having any fun. But we used that pause to set in our culture that we would come out of this a better company than we went into it. And part of that was, we didn't have some of the other things that we were used to working on regularly, which gave us time to dedicate resources to finishing this rebrand and making sure the collateral was all really good. And, all of those things that otherwise might have gotten knocked down your priority list. So we tried to make use of this pandemic pause, which we are hopefully on the way out of here and back to regular business.
The pandemic pause. Yes, that's good that you paused and didn't stop. There's a really great article I'll include in the show notes. And I did mention on another episode where I had a great conversation with Sean Amirati. He and I talked about corporate innovation at mature companies. And so that's one of the things I like about your story today is we're talking about succession, but we're also talking about innovation and what does the next generation do differently. So it ties in really well with that. And so this article, I think it was a McKinsey article, talked about the successful companies are going to come out of the recession caused by the pandemic are probably the ones that have, shored up their balance sheet, made sure operations are good, made sure their people are safe, their customers are safe. And that's step one, if you will. That's a very big step one, but that's step one. And in parallel, keeping the innovation initiatives going is really the key. So that this pause that you mentioned, Chris, was a pause of maybe business as usual with clients because you couldn't physically see them for a while and you couldn't see your employees for a while. But at the same time, though, you didn't give up on this rebrand. You didn't give up on the push to a new market position and keeping your new data analytics approach, coming to market the way that you want. So I think that's an awesome thing that you've shared with us. And any learning so far about the rebrand? Are you seeing that the market is adopting your new positioning?
Sure. So what we're seeing is that even just the name change itself created the opportunity for us to continue to develop our identity. And so one of the things that we've always done as an organization, this goes back to Bill, at the very, very start of what we did, is that we focus on the patient recovery process. In fact, we're the only patient recovery process partner out there in the industry. What we have learned is that if you do a better job helping someone get well, that all of the other stakeholders in the process get better outcomes. And so part of this rebrand was continuing to push that part of our culture and part of our identity forward, that we need to be efficient, we need to be effective, but we also need to realize that we're treating patients, right? So that was a really key thing for us to push forward in the rebrand, and it's something that the market has responded to.
That's fantastic. And Bill, from the history and the legacy standpoint, the company's got a different name now. Your name is not literally on the door, but certainly your imprints are everywhere. But as you now see the company with a new name and there's a new business positioning, a new market positioning out there, how does that make you feel?
Well, very positive. Again, everything is a learning process. I'm at the stage now where I'm comfortable turning over responsibility to other people. I've recognized that the company is going to be as successful as the talent pool that we have. For entrepreneurs, I think that's difficult because you, in the back of your mind, you started this and you still think to some extent that you have all the best ideas. At this stage, seeing the company evolve with a new identity and frankly, a new management team and a new approach to strategic planning, I'm now in more of an advisory position. I'm looking more big picture. I'm consulting with the process itself, but I'm not interrupting the process. I give it guidance, I give it some direction, but it's time for me to step back to some extent and watch this magnificent management team I have, and I mean that honestly, do what they do best. So it's actually very encouraging, Laurie.
It really is a great management team. This is the best management team we've ever had as an organization. And it's also the first time we've had a management team where we really want to build them into leaders. Honestly, if any member of our management team got a job to be, got an offer to be in the C-suite somewhere else, we would probably say, great, take the knowledge that you have here and try and create a great organization wherever you go. And Bill has been instrumental in driving that.
That's fantastic. For both of you, you have such a close relationship. You used to share this office, then you had the door. But you're very close as father and son and as coworkers and in the company. I wanted to make it a little personal for you and give you each a turn to tell the other person if there was something that maybe you haven't told them before about how you feel about them, maybe something you admire about them or something you're proud of about them. Chris, you want to go first?
Sure. So, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I have never seen someone who has the capacity to work the way Bill did while founding this company, but at the same time to be receptive and humble and realize that his ideas weren't always the perfect ideas. And that is so challenging as a person. And I just am so grateful to have had that example set for me of hard work and of humility and of caring. And so I have always really appreciated that, Dad.
Appreciate that, Chris. I can tell you very straightforwardly, what I most admire about my son first is his honesty. Chris tells the truth no matter what. Secondly, his faithfulness. Chris has had many opportunities to do other things, but he has been loyal and faithful to me personally, to the organization. He has gone through the thick and thin. He's the one I go to for encouragement. When I'm down, he will be there telling me that everything is going to be fine, and he's an uplifting force. I will mention this personal story, which just not many people know, but my son donated 60% of his liver to his mother for a transplant surgery to literally save her life. So the accolades I could pour on my son, I think I could take days doing. But at the top of the list, his honesty and as well his faithfulness and his loyalty to me. Never forget it.
Thanks.
Those are beautiful sentiments. Thank you for sharing those. Is there anything else that either of you would like to share that I didn't ask you about today?
So one thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is, we've taken this progressive approach in technology, and starting in the process, we knew that it would have to continue to develop, right? You couldn't kind of reach a point and say, this is it. We don't have to do anything else. And so we just recently found out that Medicare has made some changes to create some safe harbors in workers' compensation that allow for performance-based reimbursement. So for the last 30 years, you haven't been able to pay a provider who does a better job more. And one of the reasons is there wasn't a good way to measure it. And so our predictive analytics and the transparency that we provide does provide a way to measure it, a very unique and accurate way to measure it. And CMS just changed those regulations. It actually changes in 6 days. So we are moving as one of the first companies, if not the first company in 30 years, into value-based or performance-based reimbursement for providers to try and align their behavior with what we know produces the best clinical outcomes. And this is really, really exciting because nobody's gotten to do it. So we set that development as a priority, and we haven't stopped doing that. And I hope that someday someone will walk in and come up with an idea that can push us even further. So we're really excited about that.
That's super cool. And just to put a timestamp on this, in case people listen to it when it's not that they haven't been released, but they are in the market, this is January 2021. So depending on when folks listen to the show, the CMS rules may have been out for a while, a couple, let's say a month or at least more. That's super cool. I think you mentioned strategic planning, Bill, earlier. One of the things in strategic planning is to consider external threats and obstacles, and not to shine a negative light on CMS as an obstacle, but certainly can, with regulations, it certainly can hamper what you're trying to accomplish. So the fact that, what did you say, in 30 years it hasn't changed, here we are, and they're making some changes that you've been well positioned for. So another kudos to your forethought for both of you and the company and management team to put your company in a place to benefit from that shift in the regulatory environment. That's pretty cool. Bill, anything that you want to add?
Actually, just a point of being very excited about where we are. Again, innovation, which you mentioned early on, Laurie. I like the fact that Chris and our management team are on the front edge of innovation when it comes to the workers' compensation industry. The predictive analytics and the building blocks up to this point allow us now to take advantage of this regulatory change. So again, I think I'm frankly very proud of the fact that I had forward-thinking people, and that instead of being crippled by regulation, we're able to take advantage of it. So all good things looking forward.
That's fantastic.
And it produces results. That's the other great thing. It's not like we did all this activity to not be able to demonstrate improvement. We've gone through all these growth iterations and brand iterations and pivots to show that the system that we use produces dramatically better. We're talking about 50 or 60% better results compared to unmanaged claims. So it's fun that the ideas that we had turned into real results for the stakeholders.
Yeah, fantastic. That's fantastic. So the very last question for you both is if you have a favorite quote or something that you like to talk about all the time regarding leadership or entrepreneurship. Chris, why don't you go first?
So I have an Eisenhower quote that I like, which is that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And that is so true. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, which I think someone used already.
They did. That's a Mike Tyson quote.
That's a Mike Tyson quote. However, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable, right? You've got to do that process. You've got to do that work, or you can't get to a place where you can pivot because you just don't understand. So that's mine.
That's a very important quote. I like that a lot. Bill, how about for you?
Yeah, something that I literally rely on a regular basis. And it is that you will know when you are a mature manager when the needs of your people are more important than your own.
Great quote.
Your people first, and then if your people are taken care of, you will always be taken care of.
That seems to really wrap up the culture that you've created at your company, Bill. I'm not surprised that that's the quote that you shared. It was wonderful to talk with you both today. If companies or individuals want to find you, what's a great way to find you both and find Reli?
LinkedIn is a great way to connect with us, to find out more about what we have going on. You can even reach out to us directly there, or you could reach out to sales@relipartner.com.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for coming on this episode. It was really special to have both of you together.
We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.